As we mentioned, there are certain factors that may trigger transaction cost, right? And make this transaction difficult to be achieved. And then the question, why do we care about it? The issue is you are doing business, and the nature of business is transaction. As a firm, to you, making transaction is unavoidable. Then the question is, how can we better manage our procurement? Procurement means acquirement, right? Acquiring process, so as to avoid the transaction costs, and especially relationship specific transaction costs. Okay, so there are three ways. One is spot exchange, which is an informal relationship between a buyer and seller in which neither party is obligated to adhere to specific terms for exchange. So basically, it's like daily transaction. A buyer encounters a seller, and the buyer has something, wants to buy something, and it happens that the seller has it, and then it's just one shot temporary meet, and they bargain, they reach a price that is mutually consensual to both, and then they just exchange. Nothing crazy. The second one, contract, which is a formal relationship between a buyer and seller that obligates the buyer and seller to exchange at terms specified in the legal document. So here it makes formal, and there is legal ramification if one or both parties decide to breach the contract. Okay, and there is a reason for that, like the engraved ring, right? Here we do see there is a necessity to keep faithful for buyer and for seller as well. How do you make sure that both parties are faithful? In ancient time, we may use words, we may use swear, but we know those kind of things, they don't have legal bindings. And so now we introduce contract, which do have legal bindings for words and legal consequences. If you violate your words, then it is to ensure the transaction can be done in the exact same manner as the buyer and seller had in mind when they were negotiating for the transaction. And the last one is we decide not to be a team player. It is so difficult for you to procure inputs, right? For instance, if you are an engine producer and you found your upstream firm cannot produce good solid quality of bolts and nuts, right? Which cause disasters in your engine. You found they can't do pistons well, they can't do crankshaft well, stuff like that. Then eventually you're like, I'm fed up with you. I'm gonna do it myself, right? And as you can see, it is the upstream that you are integrating into your own production process, right? Previously, you just want to specialize in producing engine, in assembling engine, and now you extend your production to the upstream, to the say to the production of bolts, to the production of piston and piston rings, stuff like that, right? So it is a vertical extension. That's why we call this as vertical integration, okay? And it is defined as where a firm produces the input required to make its final product. Okay, you're extending your production process to an upstream. Okay, let's look at those three scenarios. Scenario one, this computer producer is legally obligated to purchase 300 computer chips per year for the next 3 years from another firm. The price laid in the first year is 200 per chip, and price rises during the second, third year by the same percentage by which the wholesale price index rises during those years. So the legal obligation, these keywords, it is to tell you it is a contract, right? Okay, and the second one, this PC company purchased 300 units of chips from a firm that ran advertisement at the back of a computer magazine. So it's like a random, pretty casual encounter between the buyer and seller. So that's a spot exchange, right? And the third one, this PC manufacturer decided to make its own motherboard and computer chips for its personal computers. So now you're extending your original business, which is to assemble personal computers, to the upper stream. That's a vertical integration. There are several things. All right, so let's look at how to decide which is the best scenario. So if there is no specialized investment, then you should decide to do spot exchange. If you are to buy a pencil, just one pencil, you don't need to bother writing a contract. Writing a contract itself, it requires legal expertise, right? It is timely. It requires both sides to sit down to read through, and that's efforts for both sides. And you need, a lot of times you need a third party, which is the attorney or lawyer, right? To make sure that this contract has its legal effectiveness, right? So those are all costs. But if this transaction is simple enough, as if you're buying a pencil, nothing crazy on the buyer side, nothing crazy on the seller side, then just do a spot exchange, right? But if there is this faith needed, like the engraved rings, right? Then, or like the bulky purchase of computer that requires the installment of a big capacity production line, right? Which may potentially put the producing firm and the manufacturing firm under the hazard of bankruptcy, then possibly we need a contract, because we need the transaction to be carried out what both parties had in their mind at the moment of their initial meet. If there is such a special investment that needs a contract to enforce it, then we need to proceed to the next question. The question is it worth to buy this through contracting with an outsider, or if contracting with an outsider is too difficult, right? If it is too complex, or if the outsiders are not trustworthy enough, and eventually you decide to do it by your own. If the answer is no, if it still can be contracted, if you can still trust an outsider to do this, if the cost of contract is lower than the cost of integration, then you will decide to contract it. If the answer is opposite, if you consider contracting environment to be complex enough, to be more complex than the cost of integration, then you should consider integrate. This step, whether you choose to contract or to integrate, you can consider it is whether you want to trust it. It's like a group work. It's like a teamwork, right? Some people, they decide they can trust their teammates to do it. And maybe you need to write down a certain plan, and then you can trust your teammate to fulfill the plan, to fulfill their designated part of the plan. Then you will decide to contract it to them. Or if you decide writing this plan out is so difficult because it's dynamically changing and nobody else knows this better than you, right? If you outsource this to your teammate, you would still have to teach them how to do it. Then eventually you consider, okay, the contracting environment is complex enough. It's more complex than you doing everything by yourself. Then you may consider, let's forget about outsourcing. Let's do it by myself. That's vertical integration.